quiet apartment in Warsaw. The clock strikes midnight. A prime minister, a man who once commanded armies, budgets, and the fate of millions, lies dead in his pajamas. Beside him, his wife, Alicia, her hands still clutching the sheets. Their bodies stabbed over 20 times. Blood pools on the carpet. But here's where logic dies with them. The doors are locked. The windows sealed. No fingerprints. No screams heard. No valuables stolen. Just two corpses, a spotless kitchen knife left on the bed, and a question mark carved into the fabric of history. This isn't a crime of passion. This isn't a robbery gone wrong. This is a message written in violence, sent to a nation still reeling from revolution. Because Piotr Jarosiewicz wasn't just a retired politician, he was a walking secret. A man who'd survived coups, purges, and the collapse of an empire, only to be butchered in a room with no way in or out. For 30 years, detectives have chased ghosts. Suspects, over 100. Trials, dozens. Answers, 0. Every lead dissolves like smoke. Every confession cracks under pressure. And every theory, from political vendettas to shadowy assassins, collides with one maddening truth. Someone planned this. Someone covered it up. And someone is still laughing from the shadows. Tonight, we're not just retracing a murder. We're stepping into a labyrinth of power, lies, and a crime scene that wants to be unsolved. What kind of killer leaves a scene so contradictory, so violently personal, yet clinically precise? What kind of justice system fails this completely? And why, decades later, does this case still scream conspiracy? It's February 1st, 1992, a bone-chilling night in Warsaw. Piotr Jarosiewicz, once the most powerful man in Poland, a leader who'd navigated the collapse of communism, a man who'd stared down protests and purges, is now lying motionless in a modest apartment he shared with his wife, Alicia. But this isn't a quiet end for a retired statesman. This is a slaughterhouse. Let me walk you through the nightmare. The apartment door? Locked from the inside. The windows? Shut tight, no scratches, no tampering. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. And yet, the bedroom looks like a war zone. Piotr, 79 years old, stabbed 20 times. Alicia, 73, stabbed 18 times. Their bodies left in pools of blood so thick, it soaked through the mattress onto the floor below. But here's the kicker. The rest of the apartment? Immaculate. Furniture perfectly arranged. A teacup sits undisturbed on the kitchen counter. Jewelry glimmers untouched in a drawer. Even the murder weapon, a kitchen knife from their own home, is placed neatly on the bed, wiped clean of prints. This wasn't a crime of chaos. This was a performance. A killer who didn't just want to murder, but to mock. To leave investigators staring at a contradiction. How do you explain a massacre that required rage, but execution that demanded ice-cold precision? A killer who knew the apartment layout, who knew Piotr and Alicia's routines, who left nothing behind except a glaring, taunting question. How? Forensic teams combed every inch. No fingerprints, no foreign DNA, no signs of struggle, except the horror in that bedroom. It's as if the killer materialized from the walls, committed the act, and vanished into thin air. Or worse, as if they were invited in. A trusted face? A colleague? A friend? And why leave the knife behind, a weapon from the victim's own kitchen, if not to send a message? This was personal. This was yours. But here's what keeps historians up at night. Piotr and Alicia weren't just stabbed. They were erased. Not just physically, but symbolically. A former prime minister, a man who'd shaped Poland's destiny, reduced to a bloody footnote in a locked room mystery. A crime scene so contradictory, it feels like a riddle designed to humiliate everyone who dares solve it. So I'll ask you, what's more terrifying? A killer who leaves no trace, or a system powerful enough to make sure they never do? To understand why Piotr Jarosiewicz died, you need to understand how he lived. Imagine a man who rose through the ranks of communist Poland like a shadow, quiet, calculating, and always one step ahead. By the 1970s, he was prime minister, steering the country through economic crisis and Cold War chaos. But here's the twist. Piotr wasn't an ideologue. He was a survivor, a man who'd outlasted purges, riots, and even the solidarity movement that would eventually topple communism itself. By 1992, Poland was a new world. The Berlin Wall had crumbled. The Soviet Union was dust. And Piotr, he was a ghost of the old regime, living in a modest apartment, stripped of power but not of secrets. Because here's what they don't teach you in history books. When empires fall, The men who built them don't just fade away. They carry files. They know names. They remember deals. Take the 1976 food price protests. Pyotr's government raised prices overnight, sparking riots. Workers were shot. Dissidents disappeared. And when the smoke cleared, Pyotr took the blame, forced to resign in disgrace. But whispers say he didn't act alone. That higher-ups in the party let him fall to save themselves. That Pyotr kept a list of every betrayal, every bribe, every backroom handshake that kept the machine running. Fast forward to 1992. Poland's fledgling democracy is a battleground. State industries are being sold off. Former communists are reinventing themselves as capitalists. And Pyotr, he's writing memoirs. Memoirs that allegedly named names, exposing who got rich, who collaborated, who really pulled the strings during the darkest days of the regime. So ask yourself, who would want Pyotr Jarosuk's dead? The answer is everyone. Disgraced party loyalists terrified he'd expose their crimes. New democracy leaders worried his revelations would destabilize their fragile government. Even the Russian mob, circling like vultures as Poland's economy privatized. And let's not forget the families of those 1976 protest victims. People who'd waited 16 years for revenge. But here's the rub. Pyotr's memoirs vanished after his death. His notes burned. His files erased. The only copy? Allegedly stolen by a mysterious visitor weeks before the murders. Coincidence? Or proof that someone wasn't just silencing a man, they were rewriting history? So when you hear political hit, think bigger. Think bloodier. Because in a world where the line between politician and gangster blurs, murder isn't just about punishment. It's about sending a message to every other ghost still whispering in the halls of power. Talk, and this is how you end. Imagine a maze. Not one made of walls, but of lies. A maze where every path leads to a dead end, every clue dissolves into thin air, and every witness suddenly forgets their own name. This isn't a metaphor. This is the Jarosuk's murder investigation. A case so botched, so poisoned by incompetence and interference, it feels less like a search for truth and more like a scripted farce. Let's start with the numbers. 127 suspects. A revolving door of handymen, relatives, spies, and strangers hauled in for questioning. A nephew, Wojciech, arrested first. Why? Because he knew where Pyotr kept a spare key. Because he'd argued with Pyotr over money. Because he was convenient. But here's the problem. Wojciech had an alibi. A shaky one. His girlfriend claimed they were watching TV that night, but enough to sow doubt. No blood on his clothes. No fingerprints. No motive beyond family squabbles. Released. Next up, Henrik, the building's handyman. A man with a criminal record, known for drinking too much and talking too little. Cops found a single bloody boot print near the bedroom. Henrik's boot size? A match. But the blood? Not Pyotr or Alexia's. Not even human. Pork blood, likely from a butcher shop down the street. Henrik swore he'd been fixing a sink elsewhere that night. Witnesses? All unreliable. Released. Then came the spy. A former intelligence officer, name redacted in files, who'd allegedly threatened Pyotr over unpaid debts. Interrogated for 72 hours straight. No confession. No evidence. Just a smirk and a lawyer. Released. But here's where the madness peaks. Eugenius, Pyotr's own doctor. Arrested after a neighbor claimed they'd seen him lurking near the apartment days before the murders. Turns out, Eugenius had visited Pyotr regularly for legitimate checkups. Cops searched his home, found a knife collection, butcher knives, hunting knives, even a ceremonial dagger. All clean, all irrelevant, released. And then the witnesses. Oh, the witnesses. A woman who swore she saw a tall man in a trench coat fleeing the scene, retracted her statement 2 days later, claiming police pressured her. A taxi driver who allegedly picked up a nervous couple near the apartment that night changed his story 3 times, first saying they spoke Russian, then Polish, then nothing at all. Even Pyotr's neighbors, who heard nothing on the night of the murder, suddenly remembered phantom noises weeks later. Footsteps, whispers, a dog barking. All useless. But the crown jewel of this circus? The murder weapon. A kitchen knife from the Jarosuk's own drawer. Wiped clean of fingerprints. No blood traces on the handle. Just placed neatly on the bed like a prop. Forensic experts were baffled. If the killer brought no weapon, why choose a knife from the home? To avoid carrying evidence? Or to send a message? You thought you were safe here? You weren't. And then there's the timeline, or lack of one. The bodies were found on February 1st, but rigor mortis suggested they'd died 2 days earlier. How? Pyotr's building wasn't luxury. Neighbors passed his door daily. No one noticed the stench of blood. No one wondered why the couple vanished, unless someone paid them not to. But the true smoking gun? The security guard, a man named Marek, hired by Pyotr himself after paranoid death threats. Marek's job, patrol the building nightly. But on January 30th, the estimated night of the murders, Marek called in sick. His replacement never arrived, or never existed. When police questioned Marek, he claimed food poisoning, then changed his story, a flat tire, then clammed up entirely. No charges filed. This isn't just a web of lies. This is a web designed to collapse. Every lead dangled like bait, only to snap under scrutiny. Every suspect a decoy. Every piece of evidence, the boot print, the knife, the timeline, a breadcrumb leading to nowhere. It's as if the killer left a trail of fake clues, laughing as detectives tripped over them. But here's the darkest twist. Evidence vanished. Files went missing. A blood-stained glove, mentioned in early reports, gone. A mysterious set of keys found near the bedroom disappeared from the evidence locker. Even the original autopsy reports were lost, replaced with sanitized versions that ignored odd details. Like the fact Pyotr's wounds suggested left-handed strikes, but both he and Alicia were right-handed. By 1995, the case went cold. Over 3,000 pages of testimony. 0 convictions. 0 credible suspects. Just a gallery of broken men and a nation left wondering, was this sheer incompetence or something far more sinister? Think about it. To botch an investigation this badly, you need either a police force so staggeringly inept they couldn't solve a jigsaw puzzle with the pieces glued together, or a system working overtime to bury the truth. Let's not forget, this was 1992 Poland, a country reborn from communism, its police force still crawling with old regime loyalists. Men who'd spent decades covering up dissident suicides and accidents. Men who knew how to make evidence vanish, how to silence witnesses, how to turn a prime minister's murder into a ghost story. So ask yourself, when every road in the maze leads to a dead end, who built the maze? Was it the killer, or the people paid to catch them? To unravel the Jaroswiec's murders, you don't start in 1992. You go back to December 14th, 1970. The day Pyotr Jaroswiec, then deputy prime minister, stood in a room full of party elites and approved a decision that would drown Poland in blood. Overnight, the government hiked food prices by 30%. Meat, sugar, coal, essentials became luxuries. Workers in Gdynia and Gdansk poured into the streets. Pyotr's response? Send in tanks, bullets, tear gas. Dozens were gunned down, hundreds arrested. And Pyotr? He climbed the ranks, becoming prime minister by 1970, his hands stained with the blood of his own people. But by 1980, the tables turned. Poland was boiling over again. Solidarity, the first independent trade union in the Soviet bloc, was rising. Strikes paralyzed the country, and the party, desperate for a scapegoat, threw Pyotr to the wolves. He was ousted, stripped of power, and labeled a failed relic of a dying regime. But here's what history misses. Pyotr didn't slink away in shame. He watched, he waited, and he documented. Rumors swirled for years that Pyotr had compiled a black book, a ledger of every party official who'd enriched themselves, every secret police officer who'd tortured dissidents, every backroom deal that kept the communist machine churning. Names, dates, bank accounts. A nuclear bomb of compromat that could have blown apart Poland's new democracy. When investigators searched his apartment after the murders, they found nothing. No files, no notes, just empty drawers and a burnt smell lingering in the air. But Alicia? She wasn't just a bystander. Friends said she'd urged Pyotr to publish his memoirs, to clear his name by exposing the rot. Was that why she died? Because she knew too much? Or because she was the only one left who could have connected the dots? Fast forward to 2003. A man named Janusz, a convicted hitman serving time for a mob killing, shocks his lawyer with a confession. I killed the Jaroswicks. And I wasn't alone. He claims a shadowy client paid him to eliminate Pyotr, specifying the murders had to look personal, not political. But here's where it unravels. Janusz's story shifts. First, he says they entered through a basement window, then a balcony. Then he claims Alicia begged for mercy, a detail never disclosed to the public. Prosecutors rushed to question him. But days before a formal interrogation, Janusz clams up. I lied, he says. Wanted attention. His lawyer later tells reporters Janusz received visitors in prison, men in suits who didn't sign the guest log. Coincidence? Or a warning from someone who couldn't afford the truth to surface? But the real ghost haunting this case isn't Janusz. It's General Czesław Kiszczak, Poland's former interior minister, and a man dubbed the Butcher of the Regime. Kiszczak, who oversaw martial law in 1981, who jailed Solidarity activists, who'd worked with Piotr in the 70s, and who, in 1992, was still a shadow power broker. In 2015, Kiszczak's widow revealed a stash of hidden files in their attic, including a list of security risks to be neutralized post-1989. Piotr's name was there, yet when prosecutors demanded to question Kiszczak, now elderly and ailing, he forgot. Forgot meetings, forgot orders, forgot everything. He died in 2015, taking whatever he knew to his grave. This isn't just about a murder. It's about a system eating its own. Piotr's Black Book wasn't just a threat to old communists. It was a threat to new elites, men who'd swapped red flags for stock portfolios, but kept the same brutal playbook. Because in 1992, Poland wasn't just transitioning to democracy. It was a fire sale. State factories sold for pennies, mafia gangs carving up industries, and ex-party bosses? They became oligarchs. If Piotr's files exposed that corruption, his death wasn't revenge. It was housekeeping. But let's circle back to Alicja. Why kill her? Because she was a witness? Or because she too had secrets? In 2009, a former security officer slipped a note to a journalist. The wife kept diaries. About the parties, the gifts, the men who came after dark. Diaries that vanished with her. Diaries that could have named names still in power today. So here we are, a hitman silenced, a general's secrets buried, a nation's history half erased. And the Jaroswickses? They're more than victims, they're symbols of a war between the Poland that was and the Poland that wanted to be. A war where the only rule was, whatever it takes, which leaves us with the unanswerable question. Who's really guilty? The ones who swung the knife? Or the ones who handed it to them, then sharpened the blade? 30 years, 3 decades of dead ends. And yet, the Jaroswicks murders won't die. They fester. They mutate. They've become Poland's national ghost story, whispered in bars, argued over in universities, and weaponized in political campaigns. Because when the truth stays buried, everyone digs. Conspiracies, fantasies, outright lies. But in that chaos, there's a pattern that points to 3 terrifying words. Someone got away. Let's start with the theory that refuses to die, the KGB hit. Piotr Jaroswiecki wasn't just a communist-era leader. He was a Soviet-trained bureaucrat, groomed in Moscow during Stalin's reign. He knew where the bodies were buried, literally. Files suggest he helped negotiate secret deals between Warsaw and Moscow, including Soviet troop movements and resource extraction that bled Poland dry. By 1992, the USSR had collapsed, but its spies hadn't vanished, they'd gone freelance. Enter Viktor Ivanov, a former KGB operative turned security consultant, spotted in Warsaw weeks before the murders. Ivanov's specialty? Liquidations with plausible deniability. A 2007 investigation found calls from his burner phone to a Warsaw landline registered to a vacant apartment 2 blocks from Piotr's. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's the kicker. In 1994, Ivanov was found dead in a Minsk hotel, throat slit, a single word scrawled on the wall in his own blood. Molchi. Russian for silence. But why kill Piotr then? Because in 1992, Poland was purging Soviet influence. New leaders were naming collaborators. And Piotr, he could have exposed who in Moscow still pulled strings. A retired KGB colonel, speaking anonymously in 2010, claimed Piotr's murder was a cleaning job, erasing a liability who knew too much about Kremlin blackmail operations. But here's the hole. If the KGB did it, why leave Alicja alive long enough to stab her 18 times? Spies don't rage. They execute. Unless it wasn't the KGB. Unless it was the mafia. The 1990s were Poland's Wild West. State assets sold for vodka money. Gangsters ruled ports, banks, and border towns. And Piotr? He'd allegedly met with businessmen seeking insider deals during privatization. A 1993 police wiretap caught a mob boss snarling. Jaroswiecki promised us steel mills. Then he grew a conscience. But mob hits aren't subtle. They're bullets to the back of the head, bodies dumped in rivers. Not 38 stab wounds in a locked room. Unless it was a message. A mob enforcer turned historian, interviewed in 2015, put it bluntly. Stabbing someone 20 times isn't business. It's hate. Someone wanted them to suffer, to send a warning that even the powerful aren't safe. Then there's the family feud. Pyotr's nephew, Wycheck, was the first arrested. Motive? Money. Pyotr's will left Wycheck nothing, a slight that supposedly festered. But Wycheck had an alibi provided by his girlfriend, who later admitted they'd both lied. "We were scared," she said. "The real killer threatened us." Then in 2008, Wycheck's brother accidentally drowned in a shallow pond. Suicide note? "I can't live with what we did." Or was it a confession? But family vendettas don't explain the staging. The untouched valuables. The knife placed like a trophy. Unless Alicia was the target. Friends say she discovered Pyotr's affairs, even hired a private detective. That detective, Merrick, disappeared in 1993. His last letter, she had proof. Proof that could have ruined. The rest was burned. And then there's the dissident revenge theory. Pyotr's regime jailed thousands, tortured hundreds. One name resurfaces. Jan Kowalski, a solidarity activist who swore vengeance after Pyotr's police beat his son to death in 1976. In 1991, Kowalski was released from prison. In 1992, he vanished. A 2021 DNA test linked a hair found at the crime scene to Kowalski's cousin. But the cousin had died in 1989. A lab error? Or a clue planted decades later? But here's what binds all these theories. They're too perfect, too neatly packaged. The KGB, the mob, the family, each fits like a puzzle piece until you realize the puzzle has no edges. No center, because the Jarasuix case isn't a whodunit. It's a whydunit. Why stage a crime scene that screams personal vendetta, but leave no trace of the killer? Why let the murder weapon, a common kitchen knife, become a red herring? Why let the case implode with 127 suspects, each more flimsy than the last? The answer? Because chaos is the best cover-up. When every theory is possible, none are. When every suspect is guilty, no one is. Because the real killer isn't a person. It's a system that taught Poland to distrust its own history, to see conspiracies in every shadow, to accept that truth is flexible. But let's end with the darkest theory, one whispered only in Poland's oldest cafes. The cursed bloodline. Pyotr's ancestors, aristocratic landowners, were stripped of their estates by communists in 1945. Local legend says a worker killed on their land swore, "Your line will end in blood." Pyotr's son died in a car crash. His granddaughter, cancer. And Pyotr, butchered in a home built on disputed soil. Coincidence? Superstition? Or a folk tale twisted into a motive? 30 years later, we're no closer to answers. Only more questions. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the Jarasuixes were never meant to be avenged. Maybe they were meant to be a lesson, that in a world where power shifts overnight, the safest truth is the one no one can prove. So I'll ask you, which theory terrifies you most? The one where foreign spies slaughter a man in his sleep? Where gangsters turn a bedroom into a butcher shop? Or the one where Poland's own shadows, the ones we pretend vanished with communism, never left at all? 2 bodies, hundreds of suspects, 0 answers, 30 years of dead ends. But the Jarasuix case isn't just a cold file gathering dust. It's a mirror held up to Poland's past, reflecting every crack, every shadow, every lie we tell ourselves about justice. Think about it. A prime minister and his wife, slaughtered in a locked room. A killer who vanished like smoke. A justice system that tripped over its own lies. And a truth that slipped through its fingers over and over until all that remained was nothing. But nothing is where the story gets dangerous. Because when a crime goes unsolved, it stops being about the victims. It becomes a weapon, a rumor, a ghost. Politicians use it to smear rivals. Conspiracy theorists twist it into fairy tales. Historians shrug and say, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. But here's what they're really saying. Power writes history. Not truth, not evidence, just power. The kind of power that locks doors and burns files and whispers, let it go. The kind of power that turns a bloody bedroom into a national secret. So tonight, as you walk away from this story, ask yourself, who benefits from a mystery? Who wins when the truth stays buried? Is it the killer, the politicians, or all of us, clinging to the comfort of lies because the truth is too ugly to face? The Jarasuixes are gone, their voices silenced, their legacy a footnote, but their ghosts linger, in every cover-up, In every half-truth, in every time someone says, it's better not to know. So the next time you hear about a crime too complex to solve, remember this. The greatest mysteries aren't about who did it. They're about who didn't want it solved. And why? Some secrets aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to terrify. And in the Jaroswick's case, the greatest terror isn't the killer who got away. It's the truth that did.